Well, I think growing up in Zanzibar, which is in a way a concentrated cosmopolitan society.
This series of presentation is part of the Awakening Project.
And at that time, then I joined here. It was government Indian Junior.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Welcome to learning from our history series of the Awakening Project of the Shi'i Muslim community. Awakening Project is a grassroots-led project that looks at challenges facing the community and how the foundational institutions of family, madrasa, and member can be suitably equipped to overcome these challenges. In this series of presentations are conversations from various personalities of our community whose lives have touched many of us and shaped Shi'i Muslim community. Such conversations are of immense benefits to all in the community to understand our heritage as well as our community history. You will find more information on the challenges and solutions on the Awakening Project of the Shi'i Muslim community website and various YouTube presentations. Now I have with me Professor Liyakat Takim. Assalamu alaikum, Liyakat bhai.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Professor Liyakat Takim is the Sharjah Chair in Global Islam at McMaster University in Canada. A prolific writer and speaker, he has authored and or translated 8 books. He is currently working on his 9th book on Quranic exegesis. He has also written more than 140 scholarly works, which have been published in various journals, books, and encyclopedia. Professor Takim's research interests lie in topics such as Reformation in Islam, Quranic exegesis, the role of custom in shaping Islamic law, Islam in the Western diaspora, Islamic fundamentalism, Islamic mystical tradition, Islamophobia, the treatment of women in Islamic law, and many other topics. His latest book, titled Shi'ism Revisited, Ijtihad and Reformation in Contemporary Times, was published by Oxford University Press in January 2022. Professor Takim has also spoken at more than 120 academic national and international conferences. He has spoken in different parts of the world, ranging from Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore, to East Africa, Dubai, and North America. Professor Takim has taught at several universities and is actively engaged in dialogue with different faith communities. Welcome again to the Awakening Project YouTube platform. Liyakat bhai.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
How are you nowadays? How are you keeping?
I'm doing fine.
Right.
Well.
So what are you up to nowadays? I mean, I know you are in the academic field, so talk to us about your latest research, maybe.
Yeah, I'm actively writing my 9th book now, which is primarily on a project or an idea which has never been done in any language as far as I can see. Shia exegesis, which means Shia commentary of the Quran, but from a different angle, which is that I'm looking at the earlier commentaries, the earliest commentaries that we have, starting in the 9th centuries and working down to the present century, modern times, and looking at and comparing how the commentaries change on certain topics through time, how the authors are shaped by their own culture in commenting on the Quran. So it's not so much on the Quran itself, although of course it does involve the Quran, but more of the commentary on the Quran and how these commentaries change with time.
Okay, Liyakat, I want to come back to that, what you're writing as part of our exploration, and perhaps we can discuss it a bit more and you can enlighten us, and we will try and explore the theme of the book, if you like.
Sure.
Now, I have 5 themes upon which to build our conversation. So I will begin with your background so that we can lay the foundation upon which I want to then sort of go through some of the themes and build a conversation with you. You were born in 1957 and grew up in Zanzibar. I think you were born in Zanzibar, Liyakat Bhai, and grew up there?
Yeah, I was born in Zanzibar, grew up in Zanzibar, early childhood in Zanzibar.
Right. So could you tell us about your family upbringing and what life was like there during sort of your younger years? Sort of, we want to see what was Zanzibar like for you as a child.
For those who've been to Zanzibar, they'll tell you it was certainly in those days a very simple and nice lifestyle. Things were pretty good for us. My father was a travel agent in Zanzibar. Many of you will know him, Akbar Rashid Nata, as he used to be called. We had to leave Zanzibar because of the revolution in 1964. Things politically, economically, socially were not really feasible for us to continue living in Zanzibar.
So what was your schooling like? I mean, which school did you attend in Zanzibar? And sort of, can you remember any of your teachers at the time that were inspirational to you as a child there?
In Zanzibar, I recall going to the St. Joseph School, which was kind of a private school, but it was probably the best school. Of course, we were heavily influenced by the indoctrination of the Christian tradition. I even remember very vaguely having to say the Lord's Prayer because that's what we had to do in a Catholic school, as you can imagine, in Zanzibar. But I don't remember my teachers. I was just too young. But when I left Zanzibar, I was only about just 7 years old.
Ah, right. Okay. But you have a rich heritage in our, at least your family has a very rich heritage in our community history. Would you agree with that?
Alhamdulillah, we have. Many of you will remember my two of my uncles. One who used to be famously known as Mali Mia.
That's right.
Rashid Nathani. And my other uncle, who was also called Ali Raza Nathani in Zanzibar. They actually opened and operated what was called the Faiz School Faiz in Zanzibar. And they were very active in the religious lives of the people. Of course, then later on we migrated to Dar es Salaam. And I think the family, alhamdulillah, is well known, the Takim family as it's called. But actually our original name is Nathani.
That's right. And within the Nathani family, do you recall the first person from the Nathani family? And I'm talking about beyond your father's generation, going beyond that he converted from Ismaili to Ishnashri. Do you recall that at all? Do you remember it?
Well, I've heard about it. I never met him because he predeceased me. His name was Rashid. It is my grandfather.
That's right, yes.
Nathani. And he is the one who actually converted from Ismailism to Isna Ashari. And he migrated, I believe, in the 1880s or around that time from India, what was that time? India, Kutch, and that area to Zanzibar, as many people did come at that time. And he's, as I recall it, my brother keeps telling me that he was actually thrown out of his home simply because he became a Shi'i Nashri.
That's right. And I've written, I don't know whether you had the opportunity of seeing or reading the book that I have written, I authored, Koja Shi'i Studies of East Africa. I took a span from 1860 to 1960, and I'm recalling your family story in there. So that's why I wanted to, because you were perhaps the great grandson of Nathani, the Rashid Nathani, and so I just wanted to bring that into the conversation.
Rashid Nata was my grandfather.
Right. Okay. So you left Zanzibar because of revolution in Zanzibar, and do you recall any sort of adverse event in Zanzibar due to revolution?
I do remember the day of revolution very distinctly, even though I was very young. I was scared, because we could hear gunshots. Although there was no killing near where we lived. We lived in a place called Kiponda. Those who
yes, that's right. Yeah.
Zanzibar have been there will know the place very well. So we were not in imminent danger, but not too far from us was the Sultan's palace, barely a 5-minute walk to the palace. And of course, those who are living further away, including Malim Mia, my uncle, and Malim Raza's family, they actually were more in danger. So some of them actually had to come and live with us. My father tried to go with my brother Abdul Hussein, who you may remember also, to go and help them on the day of revolution, but they saw a lot of dead bodies on the streets. The streets were impassable and dangerous, so they had to come back. But later on, some of the family members, the cousins, they were able to come and stay with us because it was relatively safer where we lived.
Right. So now, obviously, you went to Dar es Salaam because that was the easiest town or city to go to from Zanzibar. Is that correct? You went to Dar es Salaam?
Yeah, we migrated to Dar es Salaam then.
Right. So in Dar es Salaam now, you pursued your studies there, presumably further primary and secondary schooling there, or?
Yeah, I do remember. We went to a school called Mtendeni School in Dar es Salaam, a very famous, well-known area in Kisutu area, Mtendeni School.
I've been there. I was there myself, Liyakat.
But you probably were there before me, though, because you are a bit older than me.
I am.
Yeah. So I went there until about 1968, I believe. And then, did my kind of primary school in Mtendeni School. And then went to Azania School for 1 year. Azania is near Jangwani School, if you know Dar es Salaam. Well.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
And then I left for London, England.
Right. So which year did you come to London?
I came at a time where there were very few of us in England, 1971, January 71.
Right. So I will come back to that. But I want to go back to Dar es Salaam. Just share with us what was life for you in Dar es Salaam like? And presumably you were attending community functions and all that. What do you recall of that? How do you see the community life then?
It was a very active community life. We were surrounded by the community. So unlike the youth being brought up here in the West, our lives were around the community. So for example, we'd go, even when in school, in Tendeni School, we'd have our religious teachers coming and teaching us about Islam. Many of you will remember Malim Najaf and Malim Rayabu. God bless their souls. They were our teachers. And of course, in the afternoon, we would, after school, we would go to the madrasa. In the evening, Husseini madrasa, we would play together. So basically, we were a small and very well-knit community. And our lives were immersed in the community. And of course, there was always the majlis. You'd have to Mafil Abbas, and then you go to the mosque after that. So, there was this peer pressure that the youth complain of here. There was none of that in Dar es Salaam because we lived very close to the mosque also. So you'd go early in the morning to pray in the mosque. Sometimes if you have time, you go for Dhuhr, Asr, and of course Maghrib, Isha. And then we would have the madrasa system. So we were immersed in the community, close and well-knit, and our friends were all from within our community, would play together. In those days, where the mosque is now in Dar es Salaam, there was a gymkhana actually. And we used to go there, and many of my friends who here will remember Bhagwanji Bhai, a Hindu guy who will actually come and train us and teach us various sports.
I remember Bhagwanji Bhai myself. In the evening we used to go there, and it was a lovely atmosphere, I have to say, and it was shaping sort of a community life, social life around sort of the mosque, the gymnasium. And of course, the Chungani, which is the Kabristan area, and the sports which revolved around Chungani area. So I just wanted to ask you, religion at that time, when you were sort of growing up, what sort of impact would you say you had at the time? Were you aware of it? Did you felt that there was something that you wanted to do with the beliefs that you had? Did it make any impact on you at the time?
You know what, religion or religious studies?
No, just the fact that you were a Muslim, you belong to a Shi'i Studies community, and you were part of this community, and sort of how did that impact you in a positive way, would you say?
Absolutely, it did, because we were not only surrounded by the community, but also religious beliefs, religious practices. our whole life was basically shaped by the values that we were taught, not only at home, by our community members in the majalis, and of course the madrasas. So things like, prayers, fasting, etc., it came almost automatically. We did not even have to think about it because, as I said, we were living in that environment. So we were expected to fast. We were expected to pray regularly. We were expected to go to majlises and do the ma'tam, Then there was the Mehfil Abbas, and there was and then the masjid after that in Muharram. Our whole life, basically. And in many ways, it was, we may not appreciate it, but those who taught us formed our identity. I am what I am today because of my teachers. Now, some of my teachers are actually junior to me now here in Toronto, but I always respect them for what they imparted to me when I was much younger in the madrasa and in the Husseini society. And we may not quite realize the impact that these things have, but they do carry on, because especially when I went to England, we'll talk about that, where things were very, very different. It was those teachings and the values and the practices that I learned that kept me going as a proper Shia Ithna Ashari.
Mashallah. Okay, so now let us sort of move forward. You finish presumably, did you finish your secondary education, or you did your secondary education in the United Kingdom?
No, I did only 1 year at Azania School I remember from 69 till about 70.
Right, so you presumably did a couple of years in it used to be called Form 9 and Form 10, presumably, yeah?
Yeah, I think it was Form 9. It's such a long time ago now.
Yeah,
but
I remember.
My father recommended us to move to England, to London. So early in 1971, January 71, I recall.
How old were you?
I was at that time, I would say, less than 14 years old, just under 14.
So right, okay. Talk to us. When you came, your impressions and all that?
I had been to London to visit in 1968 before, and I was totally infatuated, I must admit, by London at that time as a young boy, 11-year-old. Life looked so good, but then when you visit a place and when you stay a place, they are two very different things. And when I actually moved there, can you imagine you're living in Dar es Salaam in January, nice and hot, and suddenly you go to London in January, where it's dreary, cold, and it's raining all the time, and the sun sets at 3:30, 4 o'clock. You can imagine the cultural shock, the social shock, the religious shock that I had. And immediately within a few months, I realized that I had made the wrong decision. I wanted to go back to Dar es Salaam, but that never happened. So it was, plus all the things that I took for granted in terms of the religious environment, the religious teaching, the mosque life, social life, everything was destroyed because I barely had any friends in London. There was very little religious life, contrary to what we have now. This was the time before we even bought the Hammersmith Imam Barakah. We bought the Hammersmith, I remember, 1972. So we would meet, for example, at a place called Chatsworth Road, if you recall. I do not know whether you remember Chatsworth Road in Willesden Green, and which was somebody's house, a small little place, just for our religious functions. And even that was spasmodic. It wasn't regular.
That's right. Yeah. So community life was virtually non-existent. I mean, you came from a rich community life, and you found yourself in a more isolated sort of environment yourself, and that must have played that must have played in your mind quite a lot. I'm sure of that.
I do remember one incident, and that was soon after we moved. There was Ashura, Muharram. And in those days, we would have the Muharram program in what was called at that time Regent's Park Mosque, if you know that.
Yes.
I think it's called something else now. So actually owned by the Sunnis, but they actually let us have it. And the key person here was a person, may God bless his soul, by the name of Commander Qasim, if you recall. Yes. Commander Qasim was the one who organized everything, put the whole program together. There was a Maulana there called Maulana Waris Hassan, who used to recite for us, and sometimes Mahmoud Ayub, doctor, also would recite for us. And even in that one little room, the room was half empty on the day of Ashur. I distinctly recall, I said, oh my God, what have I let myself in for? From going from a mosque which was absolutely full in Dar es Salaam to a room which was a small room, it was half empty. but that was life.
Yeah. Now you mentioned the name Dr. Mahmoud Ayub. Now, obviously, he.
Abdullah, sorry.
Okay. Right.
Abdullah, now in Leicester.
Right. Oh, Mahmoud Abdullah. Yes, yes. I know him very well. Yeah.
I know him well. He was in Canada.
All right. That's right. So now, what did you do? I mean, you went to you pursued your education and then you went to university, or?
Yes, I went to Hampstead School, that was called, and then we went to Kilburn Polytechnic for a couple of years, and then to City University to do my bachelor's in economics. I was an economist.
Okay, now, so then what? You did economic degree, and then what? What did you have in mind? I mean, did you have a career in mind in economics, or what?
I did not have anything in particular, but soon after I graduated, I got married at a very young age, and then I was an accountant. I was doing cost accounting in a place called Perivale in London, and then worked for a dishwasher company as an accountant in the Southgate area in London. But that was within a year, and I did not enjoy it. I did not feel that this was what I really wanted to do. I worked because I had to, not because I really wanted to. I was not enjoying the job.
Now, what year did you qualify as an with economic degree?
In 1978.
Right, so 1978. Now, you are obviously a professor in Islam, Islamic studies, teaching Islamic studies in the university. So, what led you into the path to study Islam?
It's a very good question. I was always very interested in my religion because, when we were in Dar es Salaam, most of us just took religion for granted. This is what we are taught and that's it. But I wanted to go a bit deeper. What was it that I believed? Why? How did it come about? And I always was fascinated by the study of religion. So I got the opportunity in 1981. There was Nasimco was sponsoring, thanks to some very kind people who had sponsored through Nasimco, the study of religion, of Islamic studies at the University of Virginia. When that opportunity came, I was in Dar es Salaam actually at that time. I moved from England to Dar es Salaam in around 1979. And this opportunity came about around 1980 or early 81. And I said, I better go there, even if I don't make it, even if I don't know what's going to happen to me. I always can come back to Dar es Salaam and continue to do what I was doing, which was to work in the family business that we had.
Yeah, but I'm interested in what awakened your mind to Islam. Was there any trigger?
As I said, I always was interested. I remember in London, I had gone to the School of Oriental African Studies to find out whether I can do a degree in Islamic studies or study Islam. I was very naive at that time. I did not know what Islamic studies really involved. But it was just the idea of doing something better than what I was doing. I was an economist. I was working as an accountant. I was not happy.
Right.
Then I went back to Dar es Salaam. We had a family business there. But when the opportunity arose for this, I said, I better grab it. Even if I don't make it, things don't work out, I can always come back and work in Dar es Salaam.
Well, and you will be richer in that sense that you will understood Islam much better than before. Yeah. So now I want to explore studying Islam now with you. So obviously you have given your motivation now as to why you ended up studying Islam. So where did you study your classical Islamic sciences as opposed to the academic one that you went to Virginia? But did you study classical sciences?
The only background I had in Islam was what everybody has, which is the madrasas and the minbar.
At the time, yeah.
Yes, I did not study Islam formally as such, apart from reading a few books here and there.
So with that you went to study Islam at University of Virginia. Did you say that?
Yes.
Right.
So
what happened there? I mean, you started to study Islam and sort of you presumably talk to me about, share your thought processes at the time.
Yeah, this was done, as I said, under the auspices of Nasimco. I studied with Professor Abdulaziz Sachedina.
Right.
2 years. I did my master's degree there. It was a very eye-opening experience. At the same time, I would say it was a very difficult experience, for the simple reason that as a believer, when I went to the university, I took Islam for granted. And here I was, you see, the academic approach is very, very different from what we may call the traditional approach. The academic approach asks you to probe, to ask questions, and things that we take for granted are traced and looked at from very different angles in an academic setting. So you see there are two things that we need to understand, what is called the process and the product. The product is what we believe in, what we practice. The process is how we got to that particular belief. And contrary to what I thought, these things did not come about overnight. Beliefs are always fermented, crystallized, and finally accepted at a particular point in time. They are debated, discussed, people have different ideas, and that kind of almost tore me apart in my mind, mentally, because here I was coming as a believer, and then suddenly facing the academic approach, which is more historically oriented, which is more with critical analysis, which is what we call hermeneutics, acts of interpretation. And it took quite a bit of time for me to adjust to that approach, but I was able to make it. The transition, and I think I have to acknowledge Professor Sachedina was instrumental in helping me accept Islam from a different angle, though. The beliefs never change, I must emphasize. My beliefs always were firm, but at the same time, how I approached the study of Islam certainly was different.
Now, talk to us about your teacher, Abdulaziz Sachedina. So what was his background in the sense that he's from our community as well? And what was his standing at the University of Virginia?
He was, at that time when I think he was still an assistant. I'm not sure if he had already been promoted to associate professor. I joined in 1981. I know he started at the University of Virginia in 1976. I was actually visiting Canada at that time. He had also had a very good background studies in Mashhad. He studied in Mashhad in Iran. And of course, he did his doctorate at the University of Toronto. Very firmly grounded in Islamic studies. He had an impact on me, there's no doubt. That does not mean that I necessarily agree with everything that he says or writes, but I have to acknowledge his contribution. He was, I think, a very important figure in my life.
Right. Well, perhaps you can mention any other figure that were sort of that impacted you in any way, apart from Dr. Abdulaziz Sachedina in your life?
A lot of the scholars in Qom, because then I went to Qom after University of Virginia. Before starting my doctorate, I went to do some further research work to Qom. So, for example, some of them are actually Ayatollahs now. We were kind of what we call hanging out together. Ayatollah Ali Asghar Milani was one of them. Ayatollah Ahmad Madadi, although he's older. And also, of course, Ayatollah Fadil Milani, now in London himself, were three instrumental figures who also helped me in my studies in Islamic studies.
So, when you met the scholars from the seminaries, and you came from sort of the Western academia, did you feel that you needed to sort of cross or bring the bridge, or bridge this divide that is there between the academic studies in the West and the seminary studies in Qom and Mashhad and Najaf? Could you share your thoughts on that? I mean, did you feel when you were talking to your peers and contemporaries in Qom or Mashhad, did you talk about these things?
I think we have to bear in mind that the subjects which are taught in Qom and Mashhad or Najaf, and the subjects which are taught in the academia, they have some resemblance, but they're also quite different. They're different also in the methodology. in how we approach studying the subject. So, for example, usulul fiqh, Islamic legal theory, or fiqh is not normally taught in the universities. Studies on Islamic fundamentalism or Islamic mysticism or Islam in modern age are not taught in Qom. To me, a good scholar should have both. He should have what is taught in the seminaries and what is taught in the universities. Yes, it was a transition, but my main subject in Qom were fiqh, that is Islamic jurisprudence, usulul fiqh, and my main interest was in what is called biographical literature. That is the studies of those disciples of the Imams who we hardly ever knew about in those days. What is called ilm al-rijal. So my first book actually published is on ilm al-rijal, that is the disciples of the Imams. Not about the Imams, but their disciples and their companions and their contribution.
Now, Liyakat Bhai, there are a couple of questions that arises. Obviously, one of them is the fact that there are institutions that are now being sort of created or established in the West, which provides both the traditional seminary type of education as well as Western academia. How do you see those institutions developing in the West? How do you see, I mean, would they have challenges within the ethos of the Western academia to sort of engage with? Share your thoughts on that, please, if you don't mind. How do you see the evolution of such institutions being set up with the combination?
Yeah, from what I know, most of these institutions, there are quite a few of them in the West, which teach Islamic studies, do not really employ what we may call professors. They do teach the same, or at least the main subject which are taught in Qom, and they may have some additional courses which may gear towards the West. But as far as I know, they do not teach, or they don't employ the professors from the universities, or do not teach the same kind of courses that I would teach, for example, at McMaster University. I think secondly, and these institutions will probably have a better understanding of it, we need to understand what is it that we are trying to bring up when we send our students to these seminaries which are in the West. Are we trying to make them the traditional Maulanas, in which case they might as well go and study in Qom? And also the institutions that are taught here, they only teach up to a certain level. The other levels are taught in Qom. In other words, what do we want to do with these students once they graduate? And there are quite a few of them, and they are good students. I'm not condemning that at all. I'm not saying that at all. They're good, they're smart students, but many of them do not have positions that they can occupy or hold once they've graduated. Because, mashallah, there's so many of them that you'll be surprised that some of them do not have a proper institution to go to once they've graduated. It's easy for us to send students either here in the West or to Qom, but we need to make sure that once they have graduated, they have places to go to, because everybody has to work, put food on the table. Either it is Islamic centers or mosques, or I encourage many of them, by the way, to come to the universities and get their degrees also. Because one of the problems that we face today in the academia is that we have relatively few Shia scholars. We have a lot of Muslim scholars in the universities I'm talking of.
Mm-hmm.
The universities, we have very few Shia scholars. And consequently, what is being taught about Islam is mainly, not always, but mainly from a Sunni perspective. Because the problem is us, as far as I can see. We do not train our scholars in Shia studies or Shia scholars to graduate. There are some, no doubt. But when you look at it, and I would say between, say, for example, Canada, America, and England, and maybe Netherlands or Germany, there may be about 20, 25 Shia scholars overall teaching actively now. And some of them are on the verge of retiring, like Professor Sachedina, Professor Ayub passed away recently, unfortunately. Professor Hussein Nasr is getting up there. I'm getting up there also myself. So that's why we need to invest. To give another example, if I may.
Sure, go on.
I advocate for over 10 years now, and even I've talked to Ayatollah Sistani, I talked to Ayatollah Muqtadai, who was the head of the Hawza and Qum, that we need to establish chairs in Shia studies in the West. The Sunnis have done a marvelous job in this. They have the Prince Walid, chair. We have Umar al-Khattab chair, and so on. We have only one chair studies in Shia studies, which is Ali ibn Abi Talib chair and that also is in a seminary in Hartford, not in a proper university. It costs about $1 million, maybe $2 million. But once you establish that chair is perpetual, forever. And you see, if we don't talk about ourselves, others will. And what they say about us will not be nice. We need to train our scholars to occupy our chairs so that we can present Shia Islam the way we want it done, not the way that. And if I can add here one more point, because this just goes to show the scarcity, the point that I'm trying to make. I occupy a chair position at McMaster University. And who's funded the chair? Because the chair position has to be funded by somebody, endowment, by the Sharjah, the Amir of Sharjah, Hassan al-Qasimi. And I've actually met him, and he knows I'm Shia. But it's ironic that a Sunni has to actually endow a chair which is occupied by a Shia, because we lack the foresight to do it.
The way I have understood you, and thank you very much. That's a very good analysis of a big challenge that we need to look at. But when we establish, say, a institution where you are trying to sort of bring about an academic from seminary and Western together, it's very important, as I understand it from you, that you must get your purpose and objective right. Why you want to establish and what product you want to produce. If they want to serve in the West, then exactly what the analysis that you have given is that we must produce scholars so to represent the Shia Islam, and that particular representation then is done at a Western university level. And one of the avenues available to us is by establishing sort of chairs. Am I correct in what I have expressed to you?
That is just one avenue. Now, it doesn't even have to be a chair, as long as, we have our own professors teaching Islam. Unfortunately, due to various reasons now, many people seem to think that, when you go to the academia, somehow you're bought over and you become Western and so on, and you teach it only from a Western point of view. That's not true at all. We speak and represent Islam. I want to give you just one example, Siptanbhai, so that, this thing becomes very clear.
Sure.
I teach every year, I'm required to teach a course called Introduction to Islam. So this is an introductory course at a very kind of, very basic level. It's not a graduate seminar or anything like that. But what is interesting is that I get sometimes 80 or 100 students taking my courses. This is what we call an intro level course. What we are doing here is we are sensitizing and teaching both Muslims and non-Muslims about Islam. And those students, some of them are specialists in Islam, some of them are specialists in religious studies, some of them are just taking what we call elective courses. If they're in engineering or in law or whatever, but they're taking Islam out of interest. But if we can form their mind about the proper image of Islam, rather than what they hear in the media or what they read in the books, that plays a very important role in the kind of student that we are producing in the future and how they view Islam. They may not be Muslims, but their understanding of Islam becomes far more sympathetic, far more, shall we say, sensitive than if they were just to study under a non-Muslim professor who sometimes is very critical, overly critical about Islam. Do you see the point I'm trying to make?
Sure, and I think you made it very clearly. Thank you. So now we have a sort of a broader context to what we were discussing. So that's, now I just want to sort of go into your own sort of life a little bit. You have, by the grace of God, accomplished, from the CV that I've been reading, mashallah, a great deal in your scholarly and community life. Alhamdulillah. May Allah bless you more and give you tawfiqat to do even more, Liyakat. You are a lecturer, researcher, writer, and you also take groups for ziyarat and offer your services for the Khoja and wider Muslim community. In all of these areas, did you find any challenges in balancing these activities in your personal life? Or you are an avid workaholic?
I am a avid workaholic too, but I do feel that A, as a scholar, and B, also primarily as a Shia, I have to give back to my community as much as I can. The community has done a lot for me, and I feel the sense of obligation that I should give back whatever I can. Don't forget, I was also the resident alim in Toronto, Jamaat, for 6 years, from 1990 when I moved to Toronto until 1996. I also happened to be the chairman of an Islamic Education Board in Simcoe for over 7 years. And these are all different portfolios wearing different hats, which I personally feel that I owe it to my community, and I try to be there whenever they need me. And at the same time, to do what I love to do, which is to teach, to research, to write, because I feel that I have to be intellectually engaged in one form or another at all times. So if I'm not writing, then I feel that something is missing in my life. At the same time, I want to be there for my community because I'm Shia. When I die, I hope they will bury me and someone will recite Fatiha over me too.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. I'm sure. You're a proud son of our community, Liyakat. Let me ask you, now that you have mentioned that you were a resident alim of our Toronto Jamaat for 6 or 7 years. Tell me, and also Islamic Education Board chairman. So you wore those two hats. Now just recall, and can you sort of give me one from each, an example of the thing that sticks to your mind that, oh, this is a challenge of our community in the West, and this is the challenge of the Islamic education in the West. Can you, if you are able to, it would be nice to hear from you. One.
Yeah, one thing that I think we have to bear in mind, when I started in Toronto in 1990, the Jamaat was much smaller and different than what it is today. One thing that I noticed immediately was the lack of presence of people in the mosque. We're talking of 1990 then. So my idea was to try and create programs which will draw people to the mosque. So we established various kinds of programs, Saturday night programs. We tried to change the type of programs we altered. But one thing, if you ask me, the one thing that really bothered me, if you like, which was a major challenge, was the lack of the youth in our programs. There were very few youth coming in. I tried to change the style of the lecture, the contents of the lecture. Many times I would go to the youth where they play rather than waiting for them to come to me. And here I have to give credit to Marhum Ghulam Sajan, who was very, very helpful at that time. He was instrumental in me coming over to Toronto from London. So that was, and I think that has continued. I've been saying this for the past 30 years, that we need to engage the youth more and more. Rather than talking about them, we need to talk to them. And I still don't think that we're doing enough. If you go to the mosque even now, on a Thursday night in Toronto, you'll find very few youths there. And, there are a lot of other things that we need to address in order to talk to the youth. Primarily, I think that we need to make them interested. These are the youth, by the way, that you'll find them in the universities. So I see them in my classrooms. Many of the Isnasher youth take my classes also. But when it comes to the mosque, you hardly see them there, unless on certain occasions. That is as far as the mosque is concerned. As far as the IB,
let me before you go into that, Liyakat, let's just a comment that isn't it interesting that we're still upon the challenge of bringing youth to the community center, and we're still in a way nowhere near bringing as many youngsters from our community. The other thing that I believe is missing is the demographics. We don't have proper demographics in our community, so we're unable to tell how many of our youth actually don't come and how many do come, because we don't have those demographics to compare. But anyway, that's an interesting point. What about the NASIMCO IEB chair that you held for a number of years? What sticks out in your mind with that?
Before I go to that, if you don't mind, I need to make one other point regarding the youth. And this is a very important point. I've made it many, many times. I don't think that people are taking it seriously. I perform a lot of marriages, primarily, not in the mosque necessarily, but a lot of our marriages are occurring outside the mosque. And I will tell you this, then, 70 to 80% of the marriages I perform are our youths marrying outside the community. I don't have a problem somebody converts and becoming a good Shi'i Ithna, but many of them, when they convert, instead of them coming to the community, they're taking our youths away from the community. And this is something that we need to address, because when you get this, what we may call very lukewarm or nominal Muslims, then they may be Shias now, but think of the next generation after them and the next generation after them. We're going to lose a lot more of our future generations, because we do not let our youth see or talk to, mingle with each other under the auspices of the Sharia. The Sharia does allow us to have our youths talk to each other, girls and boys, rather than I'm finding a lot of girls are marrying outside now, a lot of boys are marrying outside now. I'm due to perform 4 marriages from today until the middle of July, and all of them are with outsiders. And so many.
And these are from our communities.
Shia communities, yes.
Right. Okay.
And I've made it very clear to the leaders of the community. I don't know if they're taking it seriously, and I hope that through this it'll go to the community. Overall, I've done about 15 marriages overall this summer alone, and I would say about 12, 13 of them are outside the community. Yeah, and these are startling figures. We don't hear about it because they're not done in the mosque. They're done in the banquet halls of people's homes, etc.
So they're not even recorded sometimes in the mosque. So obviously, yeah. So talk to me about the NASIMCO, the wider regional picture.
Yeah, Marhum Ahmad Ballo, who was the chairman of NASIMCO at that time, this was about 1997. He asked me to be the chairman of NASIMCO, IEB of NASIMCO, and luckily I had the services and help of a committee. And I did not do as much work as the committee members did. Dr. Bashir Datu was one of them, Marhum Mushtaba Datu, Marhum Nisa Shrali, and of course, Brother Sadiq Allu. All of us were conducting conferences, workshops in different parts of North America. The idea was that we need to change how we teach in the madrasa, because most of our youth, they get their Islamic education from where? From the madrasas, not from the parents. They have limited exposures to the member, but the main one was the madrasa. And the curriculum, the syllabus, the way of teaching, everything had to change to accommodate the needs of the youth, the younger generation here in the West. Initially, it was fashionable for us to basically replicate what we had and what we did back home. Back home, Tanzania or Kenya doesn't work in Canada and in England. So we set about drawing up new ideas, new curriculums, restructuring our programs. We did this for about 6-7 years before, I gave up the position at NASIMCO. And there were other things also. I was visiting different centers in North America, conducting workshops, and at the same time, conferences that we held every 2 years. And alhamdulillah, I think that basically now IEB in World Federation has taken over and does a lot of the things and very effectively too.
Good. Okay, so I want to come to your academic life, if I may. Did you feel there was any academic and/or public opposition to you in Canada as an openly Muslim scholar discussing Islam? Perhaps at the time I'm talking about when it wasn't popular to talk about Islam, or viewed as somewhat inferior by some Orientalist or some people who have misunderstood Islam. So talk to us or share experience if you have had any about somebody openly opposing or you engaging in a debate, maybe.
You mean in the university, right?
Yes, university.
A watershed and very important moment came 9/11. We all condemn, of course, what happened, but it was interesting that it opened up various avenues and opportunities for us as scholars, because suddenly people wanted to know more about Islam, especially in America. And universities at that time were employing scholars to teach Islam left, right, and center, because they wanted to know who are these Muslims. And I'm not saying there were no opposition in Islam. I actually started teaching in 1996 in Tennessee. So I was already teaching. I was a visiting professor at that time. But after 9/11, more and more people wanted to know about Islam. Who are these Wahhabis? Why did 9/11 happen? Who are the Shias? Who are the Sunnis? And so on. So now there was a greater opportunity. There was some opposition, of course. You have this, and we cannot ignore them, the Christian right, the fundamentalist Christians, who basically believe that the Sharia is coming and that these Muslims are here to come and take over, etc. So many a time when I would go, for example, to churches and speak, you'd have a very small portion of Christians who would come there and speak against Islam, not necessarily in the university, but certainly in the churches or other places, or even just hall. I remember I went to a place called Vail. I don't know whether you know, Vail is in Colorado. It's the ski country, and it was far. Anyway, so I was speaking, and after that, a gentleman said, he stood up and he says, "You Muslims are all about hatred and Muhammad. We Christians are all about Jesus and love." And actually, interestingly, a lot of the congregations came and apologized to me, said, "Sorry, he doesn't speak on our behalf. You spoke very well. We know that that's not true." But that goes to show that we have this opposition from the Christian right. Sometimes those who are not well informed. Most Americans are good people, but their information is from the media, and the media does not speak sympathetically about Islam even now. So there was a big challenge for me to go and educate the people about Islam. Ironically, I remember that after 9/11, the number of classes that I had to offer people taking my classes shot up. There were extra classes, adults and senior citizens in Denver. I was teaching in Denver at that time, who requested evening classes just so as to understand Islam. And I think it's noble. That gives credence to what I was saying before, that we need our professors to teach our viewpoint.
Understood.
I want us to remember this much also, that for the longest period, Islam in America meant Sunnism in America, because the Sunnis were talking about Islam, not us.
So who is talking about Shia Islam nowadays? Apart from few of you, what about the community scholars? Do they engage outside of the four walls of the communities, or what's happening in Shia Islam? Who is furthering the cause of Shia Islam?
I know that in certain communities, some imams of local centers, they do engage in interfaith dialogue. So, for example, Imam Qazwini in Los Angeles, a number of imams in Detroit, in Dearborn, Michigan, Imam Ilahi, Imam Qazwini, also in Hassan Qazwini, and a few others. And I'm sure this is happening in different areas that I may not be aware. But we certainly need to do far more. To me, as a Shia Muslim, I feel that Shia Islam should be represented in every sector, in every sphere in our society. And this is something that Ayatollah Sistani himself, when we have met him, has emphasized. So whether it is in engineering, whether it is in politics, whether it is in the media, in the academia, in the interfaith dialogue, everywhere, we should be fully represented. Because if we don't represent ourselves, others will represent about us. So just to give you an example, the media does not distinguish between Shia and Sunni Muslims. For them, all Muslims are the same. So the media will say, Muslims pray the Taraweeh prayers in Ramadan. I'm like, hello, I'm a Muslim, I don't do that. Or Muslims believe in the triple talaq, talaq al bidah. I said, I'm a Muslim, I don't believe in that. Because when it comes to Christianity, they will say Protestant Christians, Catholics, or even within Protestantism, Methodists, Jesuits, I don't know, Quakers, or whatever kind of, they will distinguish between different kinds of Christians, Lutherans. But when it comes to Islam, they're all the same. That's why we need to bring out that, look, we are different and these are our beliefs. This is what we stand for.
And hence your point about the objective of having institutions of seminary academic together, being created in the West. Now, obviously, it has to fit in with this overall challenge that we have, so that we can create as many spokespersons for Shia Islam that we would like masses to understand as well. Just like they understand Catholic Christianity and Protestant Christianity, they should also understand that there is a different sect or in Islam, and there's not one sort of Islam. Is that what you are saying?
Absolutely. And even those who go to the seminaries, the houses in the West, they need to be able to, when they come out, to be able to talk to Americans or Canadians in the way that they understand, not to be apologetic, not to be defensive, to talk in a very polite way, because a lot of the questions sometimes may sound ridiculous to you and me, but this is out of their lack of understanding of Islam. And we need to explain to them in a very polite and proper way what our understanding, because they hear about Islam from the fundamentalists. Unfortunately, the violence makes much more noise than...
That's right. Okay, and Liyakat, what about your relationship with our fellow Sunni Muslims? How are they?
I feel that we as Muslims, we engage more in interfaith dialogue than intra-faith dialogue. We need to engage also with the Sunnis and other Muslim groups also, because not only do non-Muslims misunderstand us, fellow Muslims also misunderstand us. Sometimes these fellow Muslims misunderstand us more than non-Muslims. You know, I engage with and talk with many Sunni Imams here on very good terms with them, in Canada certainly. There have been cases, few cases, especially in Los Angeles, I know, where Imam Qazwini has engaged or even held sessions intra-faith with Sunnis, because it's amazing that the amount of ignorance that Sunnis have about us. And again, this is from those fundamentalist Imams that they listen to. Unfortunately, and I will say this publicly and very clearly, as a Muslim, Shia Muslim in the West, I feel that I face more discrimination from my fellow Muslims than from non-Muslims. Many a time, non-Muslims do not discriminate against me as much as fellow Muslims, simply because these fellow Muslims do not understand us. They have been fed the wrong information. And I'll give you one example, just one example, almost many I can give. At McMaster University, I've been teaching here for 14 years, since 2009. There is an MSA, Muslim Student Association, on every campus. Not even once have they invited me to give a talk. In fact, students have come and told me that we have been told not to take your classes, Muslim students. Why? Because you are a Shia professor. Wow. So that just gives you an idea of the kind of challenges that we face. Not because I'm a bad professor, but because I'm a Shia professor.
And largely it comes out because of the ignorance that they have about Shia Islam. Yeah.
That we have a different Quran, that we worship Imam Ali and so on, that, you know, we worship the Imams, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Now, Liyakat, I want to come to two questions, which it's up to you if you want to answer them. One of them is about Professor Abdulaziz Sachedina. You were present in the Toronto community during the incident regarding Professor Abdulaziz Sachedina, specifically the debate regarding his book on Islamic Messianism, and the, of course, subsequent conversations with Ayatollah Sistani. Now, if you can share with us, you don't have to go into details or anything like that, but being an academic, it would be nice or good to have your view on the dynamics that were present at that time, and your retrospective thinking after it. So, for example, if you can just sort of share your thoughts on the dynamics of the time and then how you see it now, what happened then, in a general way. If you want to, it would be good as an academic to share your point of view.
Okay, it's a sensitive question, but I'll try and answer it with great sensitivity.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Resident alim until 1996. So what happened with Ayatollah Sistani? I was not the resident alim at that time. Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi was. So I was there when, if you recall, in 1995, when Mullah Marhum came to Toronto, and there was a kind of a forum with Abdulaziz at that time, with Dr. Sachedina. So I was there at that time. I was a resident alim at that time. I think, within the community, I was one of the first to have read his book on Islamic Messianism in 1981, when it just appeared, and I was a graduate student of his. And I will say this much, that he encouraged us in the class. He says, be as critical of my book as you can, because we had to write a review of his book. One of the things that we were required to do was to write book reviews, not only of his book, but other books too, but also his book. And he says, if you want to, you can even tear it apart. So we were encouraged to be critical of his book. This much I will say about the book, and I'm not trying to be defensive. I'm trying to look at it in a very neutral academic position. The academic way of looking at things is very different from the traditional communal way. In other words, if I was to write a book on any part of our belief system, I have to look at who I'm writing to, or I'm writing who is going to read the book. If it's within the community, then we take a more traditional approach. But that traditional approach will not satisfy the academic community. Because within the community, if I'm talking to you, you are a believer, I'm a believer. I said, the Imam has said, or Allah has said, the Quran says, that's fine between you and me. But when I'm talking to professors or non-believers and academia, I cannot say that the Prophet has said, therefore it's true, because they do not believe in the Prophet. So therefore, I must take a different approach to explaining that particular belief. In that particular book, as far as I can see, and I've read it a number of times, although I haven't read it recently, he takes what we may call the methodological, critical approach, what we call chronology, how the belief in the Mahdi came about through history. Do you understand? So in other words, how the idea evolved. Now, this is his approach. I think, and this is my understanding, that he could have used certain different terms. Maybe he did not realize, writing in 1980s, that this would create the kind of controversy that he did in the community. Maybe if he was to write the same thing now, maybe you have to ask him that he would have taken a different approach, using different languages, given the sensitivity of the community. But, people come and say, well, he does not believe in the Imam. I'm not trying to defend him, and I have to be transparent. He's my mentor, he's my professor, he's my brother-in-law also. Okay.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Married my sister. I want to be transparent about it.
Sure.
There are very few people that I know of who believe in the Imam and have faith in him as much as Dr. Abdulaziz Sachedina does. I have to be very candid, because I have observed him firsthand very closely. A person of deep piety and faith. And even Ayatollah Sistani, if you recall, when he met Dr. Abdulaziz, he said very clearly, I'm not judging your belief, I'm not judging your faith. This is just a question, an academic discussion, if you like. So I don't think that we have a right to judge his faith. And as for those who say that he said in the book that the Imam does not exist, he has not said that at all. On the contrary, if you look at his book, Islamic Messianism, the 5th chapter, the last chapter, is about what will happen when the Imam comes back. Now, if he was to say that the Imam does not exist, then that whole chapter would be ridiculous. How can you talk about when the Imam comes back when if he doesn't even exist in the first place? If that's what he has argued. I do admit that some of the points that he has raised issues have created controversy. People have not been happy about it. He could have written it in a different way. But, it's been written, almost more than 40 years ago. We cannot go back by it. I also think that the community could have dealt, and he also could have dealt with the situation in a better way than it was dealt with. Unfortunately, the community has lost one of the best scholars that we have produced academically, and the knowledge that he has, it's a loss to the community. But at the same time, I think this is what we have now, and we have to make do with what we have.
Liyakat, can I ask you, there are two things arising out of it. One of them is the debate that occurred in 1995. I think you were there at the time. The outcome of the debate, did it sort of, to some extent, resolve the issues in a way, in an as amicable way as we could at the time? Would you agree with that? In 1995, the conclusion of the debate.
I remember distinctly because I was there throughout the meeting, and I was even talking to both Mullah and to Dr. Abdulaziz. Marhum Mullah said very clearly that Dr. Saab, the member needs you. I don't know if you remember that. He repeated. And every time Mullah would actually praise Dr. Sachedina in Arabic, Hafizakallah, may Allah protect you. People may not have understood it. So he showed a lot of regard for Dr. Abdulaziz, but he did raise certain issues very, I think, very correctly, some of the issues that bothered him about the book. And then Marhum Mullah also said very clearly, and I said, look, he said, well, let's start fresh. We don't talk about the book, you don't talk about the book. We don't talk about the book, you don't defend what you have written. We need to move forward. And I thought that was the best approach, that we cannot just be stuck in the past and talk about the same thing again and again. These were two top scholars in our community, Marhum Mullah Askar and Dr. Abdulaziz Sachedina. And we needed both of them for the betterment of the community. My vision was always looking forward rather than back. Whatever happened, had happened. And I'm one of those. I remember there was a break in the session, and I'm the one who told Dr. Abdulaziz that what Mullah is saying is correct. You should accept that, and let's move forward. Otherwise, we will just keep on and on. And I think that yes, overall, it was resolved amicably at that time. At that time, yeah. Now, I just want to sort of say something about, because he subsequently went on to develop a number of, he then authored a number of publications, and amongst them, one of a very useful one that I thought was the one on bioethics, because that was quite a seminal sort of work. And I just wanted to know from the academic circle, was Aziz Sachedina's academic work and general work on Islam recognized by Muslim universities, particularly in Iran and Iraq? Have you got any knowledge of that? I do not. I think that is the best person to ask is Dr. Abdulaziz himself. But I know, as you know, he's written a book on Islamic biomedical ethics, which has been, I think, well accepted by some. Not everybody agrees with what he has said, of course. There's always room for debate and discussion. Always, yes. Right. Okay, now there is another question I want to ask you. Again, it's your discretion. Today we have a trend of banning religious scholars from the member when different opinions, new ideas, or simply knowledge from our own sources are presented, which people may not have heard of. Now, I'm asking this not out of any intention to create controversy. I don't want to create controversy, but to genuinely understand why these trends exist, particularly from academic point of view as well. Perhaps you can enlighten us with your experiences, but also whether banning or ostracizing is something valid and promoted by the Quran and Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. I may have put you on the spot, Liyakat, but again, your discretion here. No, I appreciate that, and I would like to address that particular issue because I don't think that banning and ostracizing and stigmatizing is the right approach. We have to understand that Islam is not a monolith. In other words, it's very pluralistic. By that, I mean to say that when it comes to Islamic law, Islamic theology, Islamic practices, there are multiple views. No one person, unless he is infallible, can claim that he speaks on behalf of the whole of Islam. Nobody can do that. He can say that this is my understanding, this is based on my research, this is what it is. And the ulama have always said that that's why, very humbly, they say at the end, Wallahu alam, that God knows better. In other words, this is my understanding of it. So therefore, when any scholar, for that matter, comes and gives a view, if we do not agree with him, first of all, we need to engage him. In other words, what has he said? Why has he said it? On what basis? Maybe he's right and I'm wrong. Maybe he's wrong and I'm right. But simply banning him because he said something different is totally wrong. In fact, we have so many cases where people say things in the past which were deemed wrong and later on came to be right. Islam has always been pluralistic, right from the beginning of our scholarship. For example, to give you one or two examples, Sheikh Mufid was a great scholar living in the 11th century, and his teacher was Sheikh Saduq. And yet, even though there were close relationship between the teacher and the student, there were also differences. To the extent that Sheikh Mufid wrote a whole book called Tashih al-I'tiqad, that is the correction of the i'tiqad of Sheikh Saduq. This was not a small matter, it's about aqidah. And yet, he was never banned. Sheikh Saduq was never banned. His books were read and are still being read, even though he has said things which, if any of us were to say today, we would probably be called not a Muslim. He said, Sheikh Saduq, very clearly that this prophet made what we call sahu, inadvertence. He made a mistake in prayer. We're talking about the prophet now. And yet, as I say, we have tolerated it and we continue to read his books. Of course, we disagree with what he says. And there are numerous other examples. Fadlallah Nuri, in the last century, in the 19th century, he brings almost so many, over 100 arguments to show that the Quran that we have now is not the real Quran. It's distorted Quran. And again, we don't agree with him, but we still continue to read his works and we discuss about it. The point I'm trying to make is, because somebody gives a different view, many a time we pass judgment without even engaging that person. We find him guilty or even her guilty without even giving him or her a chance to explain himself. What kind of justice is this? That you are the judge, the jury, and you pass judgment without even getting the defendant in front of you. And this has happened to me too, although nobody has banned me officially, but unofficially I know that. But I'm like, if you really want to ban me, at least bring me in front of you. Let's talk about it. I cannot be guilty. Nobody can be guilty by association. If you are guilty, it's based on what you have written or what you have said. And even then you should be given a chance to explain. Maybe what I wrote was wrong and I repent and I say, okay, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, as we all do. But what is happening is, because of this practice of ostracizing and banning, what we are doing is to discourage our scholars to enter into Islamic studies, or we are telling them that if you go into Islamic studies, you must say what we want you to say. You cannot be different. You have to be within that box. And if you are outside that box, you are out. If you're out, we don't want to know you. So, and I think that, these are things that we need to look at seriously and explain and get people to explain themselves before just giving our judgments on them. At the same time, as I said, that we are discouraging future scholarship in Islam. You'll be surprised if I can add just one point. Even in Qom, we're talking of Qom, the seminary, ulama, maraja. There is what I call an intellectual struggle between them. We don't hear about it. But there are some scholars now who are actually questioning our top maraja. Again, this is done at the academic level. There's no abuse. This is all done in the name of academia or a name. People are questioning the whole idea of apostasy, because our Maraja used to say that anybody who leaves Islam has to be killed. Well, some people like Ayatollah Muntaziri has said the contrary. Ayatollah Sanei also. People are questioning the whole issue of custody of the children, whether only the father has the custody, or guardianship of the child. People are questioning issues regarding women's testimony or treatment of minorities. So if somebody comes and questions and says things that we are not accustomed to hearing, why should we ban them? How come the ulama do not ban those scholars who say differently in Qom, in Najaf?
The point people will make here is that perhaps by bringing out openly in the mimbar some of these issues, it may confuse the laity, the grassroots. Now, this is the point, but what you are saying is that should not necessarily lead to banning. It may require an engagement in a process where, for example, certain things can be discussed at a certain level, at a different level, but none of these scholarships and ideas should be banned. We should always be prepared to have a process and an engagement and find a solution for something like this, where, for example, if a grassroots will become confused by what is being said from the mimbar, but then sometimes it feels that there are many other traditional Maulanas who also say things which can also be very confusing to the grassroots. So we have all these challenges that needs to be worked through. So what you're saying is that banning and ostracizing is not an answer. Engaging and working through the process is the answer for the community.
I would like to add something here also. There is a question of speaking and khutbah and majlises, but also the speaker has to be very responsible and very sensitive to the community. If he thinks that a particular topic or a particular point is going to create fitna, is going to create and divide the community, he has to be very careful. You don't talk about such things on the mimbar, because not everybody can understand or appreciate this thing. We can start talking about in private circles, for example, or even in books which the masses may not read. But we have to be very careful in what we say, and we have to have, when you talk about this at the public level, you have to be very responsible in what you say. I'm not saying that we shouldn't say it, but we should say it in a way which would not confuse the people. You should address certain issues. And if you want to make something, if you think that you have a valid point, at least present your sources in what you say.
Really, basically, the way out from your point of view would be to sit down together and work through the process and engage and find out those sensitive areas where everyone should be responsible about these things, but no banning or ostracizing. And then there are certain areas where a discussion within the community can occur at a different level altogether, if need be. But it means the community sitting down together and working through with all the scholars of differing point of view, working through this, because we don't have a choice otherwise. Because social media is there, differences of opinion will be there. You just described very eminently the differences between Sheikh Mudif and Sheikh Mufid and Sheikh Saduq. So this will remain with us, and it is not beyond our wit as a community to sort of get the process right with all the scholars sitting together and working through the challenges that are there as to what to speak and how sensitive we should be.
Just to give you another example, if I may. In the medieval centuries, we're talking about the 17th, 18th century, within Shia Islam, there arose a very powerful, strong movement called the Akhbaris. The Akhbaris, many of us may know, have heard about them, many of us may not have, was a movement which basically believed that everything has to be based on hadith, even the Quran. You cannot really understand the Quran apart from the hadith, to the extent there was no room for reasoning. And they say, very clearly, they said, no ijtihad, no taqlid. Taqlid is haram for them, ijtihad is haram for them. And this movement continued for almost 200, maybe 250 years, from the time of Mullah As-Sarabadi up to the time of Bahrani, He died in 1622 up to about 1790 or 1800. If you and me were living at that time, we would be akhbaris. But yet, they finally they were defeated by Wahid Bahbahani, it is true. But their books are still there and we still read them. When we read Wasail al-Shia, who wrote Wasail al-Shia? It was an akhbari, Hurul Amili. And so many other books. We read Majlisi, for example. Some are very die-hard akhbaris, some were more mild akhbaris. Whatever it may be. What I'm trying to say is that differences were there. And they were not banned, they were debated, they were discussed, they were defeated for sure. There are still some akhbaris even here today, especially in Bahrain. But the point is that this is the way that you work things out, rather than just, condemning. And
I think that's a positive way of moving forward, working through engagement and working through a process. And I think at the end of the day, banning and ostracizing is not going to assist anyone. And in fact, it's going to make the community much more parochial if ideas are not there to be discussed and understood. Can I come to writing and research, your writing and research? I took a look at your list of publications. They are, mashallah, impressive, and may God grant you tawfiq to continue writing and educating others, inshallah.
Thank you.
You have written, I want to ask you one thing here. All these publications, when they go to the seminary students like Qum and Mashhad, I'm sure, how do they view your publications coming really from a Western academia? Do you get any feedback from the seminaries?
Yes, I do. And it's quite surprising that I get a lot of people from Qom writing to me. They want to come and study under me. And some of them are mujtahids. And I'm like, you are a mujtahid, I'm not. But they say, no, we want to study and get a doctorate because we have read some of your works and we were very impressed by them. Now, that does not mean that they accept everything that I say. Some of my articles have been translated into Farsi. My book has been translated also. At least a couple of books of mine have already been translated into Farsi. And my most recent book is being translated now. They don't believe in copyrights in Iran. So they do translate them. And as I say, I know one of my articles created a bit of a controversy there. Some people agreed with it. Some people did not. They thought that I was totally wrong. But this is the academia. Some people do agree and some people do not. But overall, I think that people have been impressed even in the seminaries.
Okay.
When I go there, by the way, I'm always asked to go and give talks, not only in Qom, but also in Najaf and Karbala.
And they welcome you, I take it?
They do welcome me. I mean, this is the whole hallmark of the ulama, that they may not agree with you, but they don't abuse you or ban you. They say, okay, we don't agree with you, but this is, let's talk about it here and there. That's the way to do it.
Okay. So you have written on an array of topics from Muslim diaspora in America, different approaches to ijtihad, how the third shahada of Ali and Waliullah was not part of the adhan, but came to be later, the najasat of non-Muslims, Islamophobia, religious authority, and more. Could you highlight, now very briefly, if you don't mind, could you highlight some of your important findings from your research that would be beneficial for all of us to think about as Muslims?
As you said, I've written on a wide variety of topics, so it's a difficult question to answer. I think one article... It's
difficult, but just some.
Yeah. I think one article which caught a lot of attention, although it was not as controversial as I expected it to be, was the Shahada of Imam Ali in the Adhan, because it was actually not accepted, not allowed before. How it came to be accepted, under what circumstances. So that, I think, was one article which caught the eye. My book also, first book on heirs of the Prophet, that is the disciples of the Imams. The book on Shia Islam was completely new because nobody had written a comprehensive book called Shias in America. Shiism in America, it was called the second book, but I was able to write it, and it took a long time, about almost 10 years, simply because there was nothing there to write. I mean, nobody knows that there were actually Shia Muslims of the Titanic, and one of whom survived,
All right, okay.
Yeah, her name was Fatima Masalmani. coming from what was at that time Syria, but now we call it Lebanon. And she survived because she was a woman, so she went on the boat and ended up in Detroit. So these are histories, and of course the most recent one is called Shi'ism Revisited, whereby we're revisiting some of the laws, the origins of ijtihad, and the development of ijtihad.
All right, okay, so this is the Shia Revisited, Ijtihad and Reformation in Contemporary Times. Specifically, what does it deal with, though? Can you just sort of briefly outline it for us?
Well, again, very briefly, the first chapter looks at the whole concept of reformation. What do we mean by reformation? And I'm arguing that reformation in the Islamic world is very different from what we talk of the Christian Reformation, simply because we do not have priesthood in Islam. We do not have a pope. We do not have a church in Islam. So because Christian Reformation basically started with an attack, if you like, by Martin Luther against the Pope and against the church, because he felt that they were totally wrong, they were corrupt, and so on. We don't have that kind of idea. For us, Reformation means to rethink our text, to re-examine our text, because I believe that laws are connected with times. When times change, laws have to be connected with that society. Otherwise, we have a law, but the society is different, which cannot relate to that law. But if the law is to be adapted, to be applied to different societies, there has to be a certain amount of revision of the law. So that's what I argue in the first chapter, and also how to read books, hermeneutics, or the act of interpretation. That interpretation is not a one-way process. It's actually occurs over time, again and again and again. You and me can read the same book. How you see that book, how I see it, is going to be different. We will not agree on everything we read. So then I talk about the history of ijtihad, how it developed, some of the tools in ijtihad also. But I also argue that some of the laws are unethical, that these laws, many of these laws are actually pre-Islamic laws. Islam did not do away with all the laws, especially the social laws were actually adopted, sometimes tweaked and accepted by the early Muslims. But we are not bound by some of those laws because they were applicable to 7th, 8th century Arabia, but may not necessarily be applicable today. And therefore, we find that some of our laws are distinctly pro-male, maybe not so favorable to women, question of guardianship, custodian of children, the question of, for example, female witnesses, and so on. They were in a particular context, but the context has changed now. Are we going to use the same laws? Laws regarding minorities, for example. Our laws regarding minorities are distinctly discriminatory. And I have to be honest about it. And I've discussed all of this in my book. And that if we are talking of equality and justice, those laws which may have been applicable at a time when people were trying to prove the superiority of Islam are no longer applicable today. To give you an example, for example, if a Christian kills a Muslim, then he has to be killed. But if a Muslim kills a Christian, he doesn't have to be killed. The blood money of a Muslim is $100, for example. The blood money of a Christian is $12. So what is the equality? The blood money of a woman is $50. So it's half the value of a man. Again, in those days, they used to base these values based on the value of a person in society. No longer applicable today. That's why I'm also proposing a different epistemology, meaning a different way of approaching ijtihad, because I believe that our ijtihad is sometimes unethical and too much text-centered, and there can be a different way of applying reason and ethics to the understanding of text.
So the question that arises out of that would be, how have they been received by the Shia scholarship or the Shia scholars?
You know, the book only
So
came out
far.
last year. Yeah, the book only came out last year. I don't think that it's even been translated into Farsi yet. They're doing it now. Some people have told me. I cannot tell them go ahead, because the book doesn't belong to me, actually. It belongs to the press. So although it's my book, I wrote it, but it's not mine, if you know what I mean. It's on Oxford University Press who publish it. They have to give the permission, not me.
Right.
But I understand since there's no copyright, they're translating it in Iran anyway. So I have not heard any things from the ulama yet, from the traditional ulama. No doubt it will be translated. Some people will agree, some people will not. I've discussed these issues with some scholars, and some, depending on who you talk to. There are those traditionalists who will want to apply the same traditions the way that they were before. There are others who welcome it and say, you know, this is a breakthrough, or, you know, certainly a novel approach to it. I've talked to some ulama, they've had some video conferences. Some have agreed, some have not.
Okay, what about, have you been asked to defend this book in any of these seminaries at all?
Not that I can think of right now. I mean, I went to Al-Mahdi seminary and they wanted to do just an interview about the book, and I did that. It's on YouTube. Not on the book itself. There may have been certain points or certain aspects that we have talked about on the whole question of reformation. I also talk of the role of custom in determining the law, because custom does play a major role in how the law is shaped, because the law is connected with the custom too. Did
you speak about any of these chapters that you have written in your book in Qum or Najaf?
I have talked briefly about them. I have not been to Qum recently, not since the book has been published, because of the pandemic and so on. So I've not been there yet. As I said, I had a few talks over on Zoom and, you know, with some scholars in Qum. And it depends on what kind of scholars you're talking to. As I said, there are different kinds of scholars in Qum itself. There are those who are very traditional minded. There are those who are very reform minded in Qum. So the traditional minded, they said this is napukhte, means unbaked, you know, because sometimes you bake scholars, sometimes they are unbaked. So this stage is unbaked scholarship, but they have a right to their opinion.
All right, right, okay. But in any case, we will see how, once it's translated into Farsi, we'll see how well or not well your book will be received. Okay, now I want to come to final sort of couple of questions. These are on future challenges and advice. As an academician who teaches Islamic studies in the Western University, how do you see the intellectual trends in Shi'i Islam developing over the next 50 years? And can you couple that answer with what changes or transformation do you feel will occur within those trends in Shi'i Islam? Now that you're writing such books, so you may have some idea, some thought process you can share with us.
So when you're talking of intellectual trends, you're talking of within the academia or within the community or what?
I think intellectual trends generally, I mean, as you know, it always filters through. Whatever happens in the academia world, whatever the case may be, in seminaries or here, the ideas do filter through to the community level. And then that will be regarded as a new trend, maybe, or a trend or a different trend. So let's say generally, not academic specifically, but generally, intellectual trends that then go to the community level.
Within the academia, I will say that certainly in the past, say 10, 15 years, there has been a greater desire to understand Shia Islam. And therefore, we find more and more books. I wrote an article which was published a few years ago on Western studies of Shiism, how the West has approached. And I examined how initially it was German scholars, Orientalists, basically, Goldziher and others, who made certain remarks about Shia Islam, sometimes based on Ismaili or Fatimid beliefs. But now things have changed dramatically in the past, I would say, 15 years, whereby even non-Muslims have started exploring and writing about Shiism. The Muslims themselves have written and different aspects of Shia Islam, not just one aspect. So there are those who have written about Shia rituals in Muharram. There are those who have written about Mullah Sadra, for example, early Shia history, contemporary Shiism, reformation within Shia Islam. I'm writing my next book on Shia exegesis or Shia Quranic. There is one scholar who is Jewish, by the way, who has already written about Shia commentary on the Quran. I'm kind of going a bit further. So the trend is that people will want to know more. And that's why I'm encouraging Shia scholars, not only that we produce them, that we write about Shia Islam at the same time. I think that in the future, within the community, we have to be aware that the youth is very different or are very different from what you and me were. They will not accept things at face value. They will want a more intellectual, intelligible, and more rational understanding of our beliefs, of our practices, of what we do, of how we do them. And consequently, we need to produce scholars who will not just replicate what has already been said. Unfortunately, when I go to many of our majlises, frankly, I'm not surprised the youth don't go to them, because I ask myself, if I was a youth, would I really go and hear this kind of thing? Basically, just replicating and talking about the same things in a different way, different language, very apologetic. We have to understand what these youths think like. To some degree, I understand because I teach them in the university. I engage with them. But our youth will not necessarily agree with that. So consequently, the issues that we address, the issues that we raise, they have a lot of questions regarding, for example, wasila, or regarding the whole idea of shafa'ah, or regarding the idea of ma'tam, of beating yourself with chains, various kinds of things. The idea of isma, how can you expect a person to be infallible, not commit a sin or an error the whole of his life, and so on. How can a person speak from the cradle? These are issues. How can we believe that the Quran is the true word of God? These are very difficult issues, sensitive issues, but we need to prepare ourselves to answer them. Because if we don't, then we'll risk losing our youth.
No, okay, thank you. What do you think will be humanity's biggest challenge in the future?
Wow, that's a very loaded question.
I'm asking you this because I'm sure you must have thought about it. I can put it like that: Muslims and humanity's biggest challenge, if you like.
I think that one of the great challenges that we face as human beings, not just as Muslims or as Shias, is to start recognizing, first of all, the dignity of every human being. Contrary to what we used to believe, that somehow Christians or non-Muslims are lower or najis and so on. Intrinsically, every human being is pure. A lot of ulama have said it. The belief system is different. What they believe is a different issue. And many a time we treated others as lower than us. And others are doing the same, not only Muslim, but even non-Muslims are doing it. So if we're talking at a very broad human level, the concept of the intrinsic value of every human being has to be instilled in all of us. Intrinsic means you are, as the Quran says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We have given karama, dignity to every child of Adam. And we have to bear that in mind. We also have to learn to build bridges between us. I always say that you cannot be a good Muslim until you are a good human being first. You can be a human being without being a Muslim, but you cannot be a good Muslim unless and until you are a good human being, because that is what Islam teaches, humanity. We say this is like a mantra, but we do not practice it. And therefore, we need to build bridges with fellow human beings. We also need to dialogue with those who oppose us rather than condemn us. It's very easy to condemn people, very difficult to understand them. And you can only understand when you talk to them. Even when we're talking of fundamentalists, whether it is Muslim, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist fundamentalists, we need to dialogue. Because if we do not talk to them, we do not engage them, then we end up spreading hatred and violence also, which is contrary to what Islam wants, what the Quran wants. As a Muslim, I think I drew a lot of inspiration initially from the Quran, because that is the main book. And when I read the Quran, I find it is not only tolerating, it's accepting and even embracing. Yes, it's dialoguing. Yes, it's engaging others. It's engaging others for the wrong beliefs and the wrong practices. Yes, it does that, no doubt. But it doesn't go and tell us that you go and kill people because they believe differently. It doesn't do that. On the contrary, it says the opposite. You save one human being, you save the whole of humanity. You kill one innocent being, you kill everybody else.
No, thank you. So basically, the central core, the thrust of what you've just said is that preservation of and respecting the dignity of a human being, because that's extremely important. You respect and preserve their dignity as a human being, and then out of that, you would see the respect bouncing back to everyone else. And I think that way, humanity not only will solve their own relationships, problems and challenges, but then are able to preserve whatever the trust that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them, through which they exist. So finally, and I think you may have to condense this, Liyakat, what advice would you give to youngsters and anyone? I know you have in your conversation, I think you've covered it, but I want you to condense it if you like. What advice would you give to youngsters and anyone who wants to study Islam and serve their community and wider humanity? So what sort of, as a person who has been teaching Islam and been engaging with the youngsters and students, what advice would you give to anyone who wants to study Islam and also wants to serve the community as well as wider community, their own community and wider community?
I would say, first of all, to every person, not just the youngsters, understand what you believe. Rationalize it. Because if you notice, the Quran says that if you truly understand, then you will believe. So don't believe without understanding. That's the first point. I think that I would encourage our youths to, if they can, to go into the study of Islam. If they cannot understand, because everybody has their own vocation and and their own occupation, but at least understand what you believe, what you practice. Engage with scholars who make sense to you. Read books. We have to be very careful of social media, by the way, because there's a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of, excuse the language, garbage that is spoken many a time on the social media. People just forward things, etc., which are not correct, even on YouTube. So get your information from the right kind of people. Be very careful who you talk to. People, youths sometimes are vulnerable in the sense that they accept knowledge from fundamentalists, for example, traditionalists, or if it doesn't make sense to you, I don't say reject it, but question it and ask people so that you are satisfied. Say, no, this makes sense to me. I'm not saying that we reject something because we don't understand it, but question it to start with. I would encourage you to go into Islam, to study Islam, teach, and I've always encouraged people, and I'm so happy about your own son, Dr. Imran, that he is doing that. And I always encourage such people. But at the same time, don't forget your community. I am what I am because of my community. And I always say to the students, study Islam, become professors, don't depend on the community, but serve the community. Because after all, they are you and you are them. I owe a lot to my community, and you also owe a lot to your community. And then make sure that you are living in harmony with them. Sometimes I think that we are okay with the outside community, we can live with them, but we are hardly connected with our own communities. And that's wrong, because I need my community, and hopefully the community feels that it can also accommodate me.
It should accommodate you and everyone as part of the community. And I think that is the happiness that is then brought up within the community if everyone feels that they have a sense of connection with the community and regard that this is their community, our community. And I think with that positivity, I think I have to end this conversation now. Liyakat, thank you so much for sharing and enlightening us, not only with your journey of life, but also provided your reflections of how Islam has shaped your life and thinking. I have to say that it is good to hear also the voice of a scholar, particularly who has benefit of some hosiery seminary and Western academia, and also actively you served the community for nearly 6 years and done a credible amount of research on the challenges facing Muslims in the West. I'm sure our listeners, among them are accomplished scholars as well as those who are studying Islamiyat in the seminary and Western academics institution, will benefit by your insight that you have shared with us. I have to say that I found it very enlightening. So thank you very much, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. and your family and give you tawfiqat. Amen. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. It's a good time for me to speak to the community.
Yes, good. Okay. Thank you very much, Liyakat.